So if you're not familiar, Anavar, other name for it is Oxandrolone. It is a DHT derivative. Now, it was developed in the 60s. It was designed for children, for burn victims, people with muscle wasting diseases. It was never intended for bodybuilders. Now, let me back up. With it being a DHT derivative, it's non-aromatizing, meaning that it's not going to have that conversion into estrogen the way testosterone would. So, quick side note, if you have someone who's taking testosterone, and this doesn't largely apply to women, like yes, testosterone still aromatizes in women, but this is much more of a concern in men. If someone's dose of testosterone is too high for what they can tolerate, meaning that they're aromatizing at a rate that now their estrogen is too high, in men, biological men, they can then develop excessive estrogen levels, or I guess that would be quite intuitive. They can then develop gynecomastia, so actual growth of that gland in the breast tissue. So this is not something that is a new concept. I would say it's fairly new in terms of dialogue on this page. Women don't necessarily see that kind of risk to that extent, but we do have to be careful if someone's running a high dose of testosterone, but there are other things we need to consider within that. All that to say, in the case of Anavar, we're not worried about that aromatization. We're not concerned about that conversion of testosterone, or in the case of Anavar, into estrogen. Now, it is one of the most clinically studied anabolic steroids. And because of that, it's something that we do have a lot of insight into its anabolic potential to its androgenic potential. So if you're familiar, no anabolic, no steroid is completely devoid of its androgenic potential. There aren't those that exist right now. Hopefully in our lifetime they will exist. That would be sick. But right now, consider every anabolic steroid. Yes, it has an anabolic potential, but it also has an androgenic potential. Anabolism, think hypertrophy. Androgenic, androgenicity, think masculine traits. Now, let me be clear. Anavar in itself, yes, it has potential to build muscle, but the degree in which you can add tissue is going to largely be dependent on your propensity to build, whether you're in an environment to support building. It is not a hardener. I can think back to so many times that the first time I used Anavar, I remember being like, oh yeah, it's gonna tighten me up, it's gonna shred me, it's gonna dry me out, it's going to help me lose fat better. That's not what it does. So I mean, if you are like me or were like me, and that's kind of your understanding of it, I want you to erase that, wipe it off the whiteboard, and come into this with, it's really good at muscle preservation, and it's good at building muscle in the essence that it can allow you to put on tissue at a faster rate than physiologically you would be able to do naturally. Now, because it is oral, meaning that you are consuming it, ingesting it through your mouth, through the GI tract, it is going to have an impact on your liver. It is going to cause liver enzyme elevation, so ALT, AST. Now, the degree in which it can do this is largely going to be dose dependent, as well as in contrast to the amount of time that you spend on it, that you use it for, the duration. But we do see, especially in male dosing, so if we're looking at 20, 40, 60, 80 milligrams, we can see a pretty significant increase in liver enzymes. So that's a consideration you need to make if you're someone who already has elevated liver enzymes for some reason or another, which there are transient reasons that these enzymes will be elevated. So it's important, again, not to just take a snapshot of your ALT, AST, but we also have to consider whether or not this is a pattern or if this is isolated. Now, the other thing we want to consider, and I'm going to get into the virilization side of this, but I want to talk systemically. I want to talk about other systems first. Lipids, your heart, 20 milligrams a day can decrease good cholesterol, so HDL, by 30%. Again, maybe this isn't a consideration if we're not talking about a dose that high, if we're talking about a much lower dose. But if we're talking about males, if we're talking about individuals who are using higher doses, it needs to be a consideration, especially if you are in a fat loss phase and healthy fats are limited. Even more so if you have any other comorbidities that impact your cardiovascular system. Now, this is where, as men and women, we need to be considerate of this. This is the answer to why can't I just run Anavar in itself? Why can't I do an Anavar only cycle? Very common question. Really haven't talked about this in a long time, so enjoy. Endocrine suppression. Now, doses 20 to 40 milligrams can reduce testosterone by almost 50%. Now, some of y'all might be thinking, well, I'm a woman, I'm not going to use 20 or 40 milligrams. I was going to go for 5 or 10 or maybe 15. Sick. But consider the fact that your testosterone probably is already low. Even if you are an outlier and it's like 40 nanograms per deciliter, there's still going to be some kind of impact there. And really why I think this is important that we acknowledge is if that suppression is occurring while you're using Anavar, yes, it can allow you to build muscle at a faster rate. But realistically, if you're someone who is trying to do things like you're trying to check every single box, we don't want to have you low test. We don't want to have a hypoandrogenic environment. I would rather someone get the most out of what they can, either first naturally or with something that would modulate TRT, modulate testosterone, something like TRT or even something like DHEA, if that is tolerable for the individual, then just simply going, cool, I'm going to put Anavar in place to act as almost a TRT. I like to have stability there. We do know that testosterone, yes, it has a higher anabolic to androgenic ratio. However, we also have physiological thresholds in which we know virilization shouldn't occur. We can also measure it in blood. Like we can see it in our lab values. You can't get Anavar measured in your blood work. You can't see how effective it is. You're kind of just waiting for good or bad, and it's not a buffet. You can't really select to the degree in which you're going to experience one or the other. Now, because it has a very short half-life, 9 hours with a peak of 1 hour, meaning we should be taking it, if we're using Anavar, within that 1 hour time frame relative to training, because ultimately we are trying to drive training performance. Because of that, we need to dose daily. So with injectables, I mean, like realistically, you could create more stability in your levels by dosing daily, but with an injectable, you're also looking at a longer half-life for the most part. So you're going to be able to get away with less injections, less frequent administration. Anavar, it's taken daily though.